A single dad takes his daughter to watch fireworks from a grocery store parking lot, unaware the woman parked beside them is the billionaire behind the entire event. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sun had just started to dip behind the low hills of Fairgrove, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet streets. Jack Bennett turned into the cracked lot of the old Ridgeway Hardware, closed for years now, but still their go-to spot every 4th of July. He eased his rusted pickup into the far corner where the pavement rose slightly, offering an unobstructed view of the town fairgrounds and the sky above. "Here we are, Rosie," he said, cutting the engine. In the passenger seat, Rosie, his 8-year-old daughter, practically bounced with excitement. She clutched a worn blanket in her lap and a small cooler packed with Capri Suns and peanut butter sandwiches she'd helped make that morning. "This is the perfect spot," she declared, already unbuckling. "It's always the perfect spot." Jack smiled. They laid the blanket out beside the truck and set up their usual routine 2 lawn chairs, a box of dollar store glow sticks, and an old portable radio that only got 2 stations. Around them, a few other families began pulling in, but most folks were at the fairgrounds, where tickets cost money Jack didn't have. He didn't mind. The parking lot had its own kind of magic quiet, simple, and theirs. "Do you think the big blue firework will come back this year?" Rosie asked, biting into a sandwich and staring up at the empty sky. "Wouldn't be the 4th without it," Jack said, though he honestly never paid much attention to the shapes. He mostly watched her face, how her eyes lit up with every burst, how she gasped like it was the first time, every time. Just as he leaned back in his chair, a sleek black Jeep rolled into the spot beside them. It looked like it belonged in a showroom, not in Ridgeway's dusty lot. The engine cut, and a woman stepped out, adjusting her sunglasses and looking around like she didn't quite know what to do next. Jack offered a polite nod. "Evening." She glanced over, surprised. "Evening," she echoed. Rosie peeked up from her blanket. "Dad, she has fancy shoes." Jack chuckled under his breath. "That she does." And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet thought took shape, something about how funny it was. The people you end up sitting beside when the sky's about to light up. The last streaks of daylight were melting into soft purple as Jack unfolded the lawn chairs and set them down beside the pickup. The pavement still held the heat from the afternoon sun, and Rosie hopped from foot to foot as she helped him spread the blanket, careful to smooth out the corners like she'd seen him do so many times before. "Watch out," Jack warned playfully, pulling a can of bug spray from the glove box. "The mosquitoes are already forming a game plan." Rosie wrinkled her nose and held out her arms. "Defense mode engaged." Jack grinned and sprayed her down like a pro, then gave himself a quick mist before setting the can down next to the cooler. Around them, the parking lot was slowly coming to life. A few other families were pulling in, now local folks who, like them, preferred their fireworks from a quiet distance without the crowds or carnival noise. Rosie sat cross-legged on the blanket, digging into the cooler. "Want your sandwich now, or later?" she asked, holding up a Ziploc triangle like it was a prized artifact. "Now's good," Jack said, sinking into his chair with a long sigh. Dinner with a view. They ate in companionable silence, the occasional crunch of chips or slurp from a juice pouch filling the quiet. Rosie had brought her sketch pad too, and she flipped it open to a half-finished drawing of fireworks over the water crayon lines, bright and hopeful. Jack watched her for a second, the concentration on her face, the way her brow furrowed just like her mom's used to when she was focused. "You're getting really good at those," he said gently. Rosie shrugged, trying not to smile. "I want to be an artist, or maybe a vet, or maybe both." "Ambitious," Jack said with mock seriousness. "I like it." She leaned against his arm, her voice soft. "We don't need to go to the fairgrounds, do we?" "Nope," he said, squeezing her shoulder. "We've got the best seats in town." Just then, the woman in the black Jeep fancy shoes and all reappeared, standing beside her vehicle with a soda in hand. She glanced their way and smiled, a little awkward, a little curious. Rosie waved, unbothered. Jack nodded again, wondering not for the first time what had brought her here, to this side lot of nowhere, on a night meant for magic. The rumble of tires over cracked pavement drew Jack's eyes to the far end of the lot. A silver SUV, new, spotless, and far too polished for Ridgeway, glided into the space next to his old pickup like a swan drifting into a muddy pond. Jack raised an eyebrow, not in judgment exactly, but curiosity. That kind of car didn't usually show up in this part of town. The engine went quiet. A few seconds passed before the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, silhouetted against the fading sky. She wore a crisp, white shirt tucked into dark jeans and red heels that looked like they'd never once touched gravel. Her hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, and her sunglasses, though no longer needed, remained perched on her head like a crown. She scanned the lot, taking in the scattered families and the flicker of glow sticks coming to life. She didn't look lost, just displaced. Like someone who'd shown up for a gala and found herself at a backyard cookout instead. Jack went back to his sandwich, not wanting to stare, though he couldn't help but notice the way she hesitated before stepping away from the vehicle. She reached into the back seat, pulled out a folded blanket, and laid it on the ground next to her car, neat, precise, like she'd read about it but never actually done it before. "Hi," Rosie called, already waving again. She had no sense of stranger danger when it came to friendly people and interesting shoes. The woman looked over, surprised, but not unpleasantly so. "Hello?" Jack nodded politely. "Evening." She smiled, this time more genuinely. "Evening." Then she sat, carefully adjusting the hem of her jeans and slipping off her heels. Red-painted toes peeked out as she settled cross-legged on the blanket, soda can in hand. Her presence didn't demand attention, it invited questions. Jack leaned back in his chair, glancing once more before turning his gaze to the darkening sky. Somehow, in all the years they'd been watching fireworks from this lot, he'd never sat next to anyone who looked like her. And something told him she hadn't planned on sitting next to anyone like him either. Evelyn sat quietly at first, sipping her soda and pretending not to notice the little girl a few feet away who kept sneaking glances at her. The parking lot buzzed with low chatter and the occasional burst of laughter, but the space around her SUV and Jack's rusted pickup felt almost serene in comparison. Rosie, unbothered by adult silences, finally scooted a little closer on her blanket and tilted her head. "Are your shoes uncomfortable?" she asked, pointing at the red heels sitting neatly beside Evelyn's blanket. Evelyn blinked, then let out a soft laugh. "A little. They're not really made for sitting on pavement. They look like Barbie shoes," Rosie said, "but fancier, like the kind of shoes someone would wear if they were going to talk to a king." Evelyn grinned. "Well, that's the nicest thing anyone said to me today. I'm Rosie. This is my dad, Jack." Evelyn turned her gaze toward Jack, who lifted 2 fingers in a small wave from behind his sandwich. "Nice to meet you both. I'm Evelyn." Rosie nodded thoughtfully. "Are you here alone?" "I am," Evelyn replied. "First time watching the fireworks from here." Rosie leaned in conspiratorially. "It's the best place. Everyone thinks you need to go to the fairgrounds, but this lot has the best sky, plus we bring sandwiches." "I can see that," Evelyn said with a smile. "Looks like you two have it figured out." Jack finally chimed in, his voice calm and steady. "We've been coming here since Rosie was 5. Less noise, more sky." Evelyn studied him for a moment. There was nothing flashy about Jack. Work-worn hands, a plain t-shirt, the faint grease marks he hadn't quite managed to scrub away. But he had a quiet steadiness about him, the kind you didn't see much in the circles she usually moved in. "It's nice," she said honestly. "Simple, peaceful." Jack gave a small nod. "That's the idea." As the first soft boom echoed in the distance, Rosie clapped her hands, already bouncing with excitement. Evelyn watched her for a beat, then turned her eyes skyward, feeling something unexpected settle in her chest. She hadn't come looking for company. But maybe she didn't mind it. The first boom cracked through the still night like a starter pistol, echoing off the hills and drawing every pair of eyes skyward. Rosie gasped, her hands clutching the edges of the blanket as a fountain of red exploded above the fairgrounds in a perfect bloom of light. "Ooh, that one's my favorite already," she whispered. though more followed in quick succession: golden streaks, green bursts, silver spirals that shimmered before disappearing into the darkness. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely, a small smile tugging at his lips as Rosie's delight filled the air around them. Evelyn sat cross-legged on her blanket, the soda forgotten beside her. Her face tilted toward the sky, but her gaze drifted sideways more than once to the little girl buzzing with joy, and then to the quiet man watching her with that steady, patient warmth. Another firework shot high and split into a cascade of blue sparks. Rosie clapped her hands. "It's the waterfall one! Dad, it's the waterfall!" Jack chuckled. "Sure is." Evelyn caught herself smiling again. She hadn't smiled this much in weeks, maybe, month and. Certainly not like this. Not the polished photo-op smile she was used to giving, but something smaller, more sincere. "You two do this every year?" she asked, during a lull between bursts. "Every year since Rosie could walk," Jack replied. "Can't afford the fare tickets, but we get the same view." "It's perfect," Evelyn said, almost to herself. Jack glanced over, just as a burst of white light illuminated both their faces. Their eyes met briefly, not awkward, not forced, just curious. A kind of unspoken pause in the middle of all the noise and color. He looked away first, politely, but something lingered in the silence between them, a flicker of recognition. Maybe not of who they were, but of something else, something shared in that moment beneath the sky. Then the grand finale began, faster, louder, brighter. Rosie squealed and leaned forward, her entire body vibrating with wonder. Evelyn laughed, not at her but with her, and for a fleeting second let herself forget who she was expected to be. She wasn't Grace Whitmore, CEO and public figure. She was just Evelyn, a woman sitting in a parking lot watching fireworks with strangers who somehow didn't feel like strangers at all. As the final echoes of the grand finale faded into the night, the crowd across town let out a distant roar of applause. From their quiet perch in the parking lot, Jack and Rosie sat in satisfied silence, watching the last trails of smoke drift across the starlit sky. Rosie was already lying back on the blanket, her arms folded under her head, eyes still wide as if hoping for one last burst of light. Jack glanced at her with a soft smile, then leaned forward to toss their sandwich wrappers into the small trash bag he'd tied to the cooler handle. Beside them, Evelyn remained seated on her blanket, her heels still off, toes brushing the pavement like she might stay just a little longer than she meant to. "That really was something," Jack said, his voice low, as if not to break the calm that had settled in. "Best show they've done in a while." Evelyn glanced his way, her features soft in the dim light. "I'm glad you think so." He looked over. "You sound like you had a hand in it." There was a brief pause, and then she offered a small shrug. "I might have helped organize some things." "Like the music?" Rosie piped up sleepily, lifting her head. "Because it matched the fireworks really good." Evelyn smiled. "Yeah, like the music." Jack narrowed his eyes, slightly not suspicious, just curious. "So you're on the town committee or something?" "Something like that," Evelyn said lightly. "I run a foundation that sponsors the event. Nothing glamorous, just logistics, budget, a lot of phone calls." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Still sounds like a big deal." Evelyn waved it off. "It's mostly behind the scenes. I just like seeing people enjoy it, especially kids." She nodded toward Rosie, who was now pretending not to yawn. Jack watched her for a moment, noting how she avoided the spotlight even while clearly holding the switch that lit it. "Well," he said finally, "whoever you are and whatever you do, thanks. You made one little girl's night." Evelyn looked down at her hands, a faint smile on her lips. "That's all I wanted." And for the first time in a long while, she meant it. The night had settled into a warm, comfortable stillness. The buzz from the fairgrounds was fading, and most of the cars in the lot had already pulled away, taillights blinking as families packed up their chairs and headed home. Rosie had finally curled up on the blanket, her glow-stick bracelet dim and her eyelids heavy, though she stubbornly insisted she wasn't tired. Jack stood and stretched, his back cracking softly as he reached into the cooler and pulled out a bottled water. He offered it to Evelyn without a word, the gesture casual but thoughtful. She accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, gentler. He smiled. "Long night, even if you're just watching." "Long but worth it," she replied, unscrewing the cap and taking a slow sip. Jack glanced down at Rosie, now fully curled under the blanket, her blonde hair tangled from the breeze. "She'll be out before we get to the main road," he said, half to himself. Evelyn looked at the girl for a long moment. "She's special." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "She keeps me going." There was a pause between them, not awkward, just a moment hanging in the night, like neither of them knew how to wrap it up. Evelyn rose to her feet and dusted off the seat of her jeans. She slipped her heels back on, balancing gracefully as she adjusted the strap of her purse. Back to the world she came from. "Well," she said, glancing at the truck, the blanket, the quiet calm around them. "Thanks for sharing the view." Jack chuckled. "Pretty sure it belongs to all of us." She smiled, a little lopsided, as if she wasn't used to smiling that way. He reached down to start folding the chairs, already turning back to the task at hand. "Safe drive, Evelyn." "You too, Jack," she said, pausing for one last look. And then she was gone, engine humming, tires whispering over the pavement as the SUV slipped out of the lot and into the dark. Jack didn't watch her leave. He didn't expect to see her again, but some part of him knew nights like that didn't come around by accident. The next morning arrived with the gentle hum of summer-bright skies, bird song, and the scent of freshly mowed lawns drifting through the open windows of Jack's small house. He was in the kitchen, pouring cereal into 2 chipped bowls while Rosie padded in, still in her pajamas, hair sticking up on one side from sleep. "You were right, Dad," she said around a yawn. "The parking lot really is the best place to watch fireworks." Jack smiled as he passed her the milk. "Told you. Front row seat. No tickets required." After breakfast, they took their usual Saturday morning walk into town. Rosie liked to stop at the little bookstore window and wave to the owner, "Mr. Calloway," and Jack liked to pretend he wasn't checking the community board for job postings and side gigs. As they rounded the corner near the town square, Rosie stopped in her tracks and pointed to a large banner that fluttered above the stage where the town's live music had played the night before. "Look," she said. "That's her name." Jack squinted up at the banner. In big bold letters, it read, "Fireworks over Fairgrove. Sponsored by the Hart Foundation." Below that, in smaller print, "Evelyn Hart, Executive Director." Jack blinked. The pieces clicked into place with a quiet, unmistakable certainty. Not just a volunteer, not just helping with logistics. Evelyn Hart was the Hart Foundation. She didn't just organize the event, she owned it. He felt Rosie tug at his hand. "Is that the same Evelyn we met?" "Looks like it," Jack said slowly. Rosie tilted her head. "She didn't say she was the boss." "No," he murmured, "she didn't." They stood there for a moment, looking up at the banner, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Jack's mind flicked back to the night before, her quiet presence, her careful words, the way she sat cross-legged in the lot like she was trying to disappear. She hadn't wanted to be recognized. She hadn't wanted credit. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Rosie asked. Jack gave a small shrug. "Hard to say." But deep down, he knew better. People like Evelyn Hart didn't cross your path by accident. Monday morning came early, as it always did, with the hum of an old window fan and the creak of tired floorboards under Jack's feet. The sun hadn't even cleared the trees yet, but the kitchen was already warm. He set a pot of coffee on the stove and leaned on the counter while the water heated, rubbing the back of his neck like that would somehow make the stiffness go away. In the other room, Rosie's voice rang out in sing-song fashion as she zipped up her backpack. "I packed my own snack today. You don't have to double-check." Jack smiled to himself. "I'll believe that when I stop finding unpeeled oranges in the bottom of your bag." They shared a quick breakfast toast and scrambled egg sand. Then Jack dropped her off at the rec center, where the town's modest summer camp program was held. It wasn't much, but Rosie loved it. Tie-dye shirts, scavenger hunts, and crafts, held together by glitter and glue sticks. Jack watched her disappear through the doors before pulling out of the lot, the dull squeak of his brakes, reminding him again that the truck needed work he couldn't afford. By 8:30, he was back at Fairgrove Auto, the same garage he'd worked at since high school. The place was quiet except for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the slow, rhythmic clink of metal from his boss in the back. "Morning," Jack called as he pulled on his coveralls. "Radiator leak in Bay 2, came the reply. "And the air compressor's still on its last leg." Jack nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Aren't we all?" By noon, his hands were black with grease and sweat was sticking to his back. He paused, just long enough to check his phonino new messages. No missed calls. Definitely not from Evelyn Hart. The rest of the afternoon was spent wrestling with a transmission that didn't want to cooperate and mentally adding up the grocery list for the week. Rosie's sneakers were wearing thin. The dryer at home had started making a sound like it was coughing up bolts. The water bill was due Thursday. Same rhythm. Same weight. But every now and then, in the quieter moments, Jack's thoughts drifted uninvited to a silver SUV and a woman with red heels who sat in the dark beside him, watching fireworks like she had nowhere else to be. The next morning, the garage was still humming with the low rhythm of weekday repairs when Jack's phone buzzed in the pocket of his coveralls. He barely heard it over the drone of the air ratchet, but when it kept buzzing, he paused, wiped his hands on a rag, and checked the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He usually did, but something tugged at him. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the flicker of a thought he hadn't shaken since that night in the parking lot. "Hello? Mr. Bennett?" A crisp voice asked, polite but practiced. Female, not Evelyn's. "This is Allison Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of the Hart Foundation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Okay. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." He glanced down at the open engine in front of him. "It's always a bad time, but go ahead." The woman chuckled faintly, more from professionalism than amusement. "Ms. Hart asked me to reach out. She'd like to extend an invitation to you and your daughter, Rosie, to attend a special private event this weekend." Jack straightened slightly. "Private event?" "Yes. A fireworks preview in Oak Ridge. It's a smaller venue, but it's part of the testing and design phase for next year's shows. Very limited attendance. All expenses covered, travel, meals, accommodations if needed." Jack blinked. "Why us?" There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to sound intentional. "Miss Hart enjoyed meeting you both," Allison said carefully. "She thought you might like to see more of what goes into the shows, and she appreciated your daughter's enthusiasm." Jack leaned against the workbench, skeptical but not dismissive. "She even know we live paycheck to paycheck?" "We're aware, which is why it's a gift. No strings, just an invitation. You're welcome to decline." He didn't answer right away. His thumb traced the scratched screen of his phone. "Rosie would love it." "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Of course. Just let us know by tomorrow." As the call ended and the shop noise returned to full volume, Jack stood still for a moment, surrounded by the clang of tools and the scent of motor oil, wondering what kind of person offers fireworks to people they barely know. And why, exactly, he was tempted to say yes. That night, Jack sat on the worn couch in his living room, the TV on but muted, flickering blue light dancing across the walls. Rosie was sprawled on the rug, surrounded by construction paper and markers, humming to herself as she tried to draw fireworks with extra sparkle. The invitation still weighed in his mind, heavy but not unpleasant. He'd told himself he'd forget about it, brush it off as some polite gesture from a woman used to smoothing over moments with charity, but it didn't feel like that. Not exactly. And that was the problem. "You think fireworks look better in the city?" Rosie asked suddenly. not looking up from her drawing. Jack raised an eyebrow. City? Oak Ridge. That lady from the other night, she's doing a show there, right? He blinked. How do you know that? Rosie shrugged. I heard you on the phone. You said fireworks and expenses covered, and then got that weird face you always make when you're pretending not to care. Jack smirked. I do not have a face. You totally have a face. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. She wasn't wrong, and truth be told, he couldn't stop picturing Evelyn the way she smiled in the dark, how she sat barefoot in that fancy outfit like she was trying to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. Jack grabbed his phone from the coffee table and stared at the missed call log for a long second. He tapped in the number and typed a short message. We're in. Rosie's excited. Let me know the details. Jack hit send before he could second-guess it. Rosie looked up, hopeful. We're really going? Jack nodded. Yeah. I figure we could use a change of scenery. Her face lit up, pure joy. Do you think she'll be there? Evelyn? Jack allowed himself the smallest of smiles. I think so. He didn't say the rest, that part of him hoped she would be. Not just for Rosie's sake, but for reasons he was only just starting to admit to himself. The drive to Oak Ridge was smoother than Jack expected. Rosie spent most of it with her face pressed to the window, narrating every cow, cloud, and car that passed like a tiny tour guide. Jack had borrowed his boss's cleanest loaner Karan, old but reliable sedan that didn't rattle every time he hit a bump. He even dug out a collared shirt, though he'd nearly talked himself out of wearing it 3 times before they left. When they pulled into the event site, Jack slowed to a crawl. This wasn't a fairground. It wasn't even a park. It was a private estate green hills stretching out in every direction, dotted with sleek white tents and tastefully arranged lounge chairs. A stage had been set up at the edge of a small lake, surrounded by soft lighting and rows of catered food tables draped in linen. A valet offered to park the car. Jack declined, parking at the far end of the gravel lot like he didn't want to take up too much space. Rosie climbed out of the car, eyes wide. Dad, this is fancy. Jack nodded, his mouth dry. Yeah, it is. They were barely 2 steps into the field when he heard a familiar voice. You made it. He turned to see Evelyn walking toward them, a soft smile on her face. Her usual polished aura replaced with something more relaxed. She wore black designer sneakers, dark jeans, and a loose white button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. Her hair was tied back, and she looked, nervous. Almost like she wasn't sure they'd show up. Jack blinked. Didn't think we'd be walking into a Bond movie. Evelyn laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. It's a little over the top, I know. This one's more for donors and partners, but I meant what I said. I wanted you here. Rosie ran up to hug her like they were old friends. This place is amazing. Are there snacks? Evelyn crouched down, grinning. There's an entire table of them. You've got VIP access. Rosie dashed off with purpose. Jack stood a little stiffer, eyes still roaming the setup. This whole thing, it's yours? Evelyn gave a small shrug. In a way. But tonight, I just wanted it to feel like something you and Rosie could enjoy. Jack looked at her for a long second. You didn't have to go through all this. She smiled, quiet and genuine. I wanted to. The sun dipped behind the hills in a slow burn of orange and gold, casting a soft glow over the open field. The event was in full swing now, donors, sipping wine under canopy tents, servers weaving between them with trays of hors d'oeuvres Jack couldn't pronounce. Rosie had found the dessert table and was currently negotiating her second chocolate-covered strawberry with a woman in a pantsuit who clearly wasn't used to being told, please, so earnestly. Jack stood near the edge of the plaisance. Lake, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching the first few fireflies blink into existence like shy stars. He heard footsteps behind him and didn't have to turn to know who it was. You always hang out on the sidelines? Evelyn asked, stopping beside him. Jack smirked. Only when I'm trying not to break anything expensive. She laughed, then fell into a comfortable silence beside him. For a moment, they just stood there, two people from opposite worlds, sharing the quiet. "You know," she said eventually, "most people come to these things to network. Smile, shake hands, talk about board seats." Jack looked over at her. "You don't seem like most people." "I used to be." She hesitated, eyes scanning the lake. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, made enough money, filled up the right calendar, I'd stop feeling like I was always one step behind." Jack studied her profile, surprised by the crack in her usual poise. "Behind what?" "Everyone," she said simply. "My family. Expectations. The person I told the world I'd be." He let the silence linger, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." Evelyn turned to him. "You do?" Jack glanced back toward the tents, then to where Rosie was now dancing barefoot in the grass. "I wasn't supposed to raise a kid alone. I wasn't supposed to spend my life under car hoods and behind on bills. But life's not real big on asking first." She smiled faintly. "Do you ever wish for something different?" Jack considered that, then shook his head. "Not different, just easier." Evelyn let out a breath, like she'd been holding it for a long time. "Yeah, me too." And as fireflies blinked around them and laughter drifted from the distance, neither of them said it out loud, but the space between them had shifted, just a little. Just enough. Night had fully settled over the field, and with it came a quiet kind of magic, the kind that didn't need music or speeches, just soft grass underfoot and warm light overhead. The fireflies were out in full, blinking lazily, as if dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Over near the lake, a group of event staff began handing out paper lanterns, each one folded carefully, with small wax fuel cells attached at the base. Rosie ran up, eyes wide. "Dad, they're letting us launch them." Jack chuckled, taking the lantern she offered, and inspecting it like it might explode. "You sure it's safe?" "It floats, not flies," Evelyn said, approaching from behind Rosie, a lantern of her own in hand. "Sort of like a hot air balloon, just smaller. I'll help." Jack stepped back, giving them space as Evelyn knelt beside Rosie and showed her how to unfold the delicate rice paper without tearing it. They knelt in the grass, their heads bent together under the lantern's soft orange glow, laughing at how flimsy it all felt at first. "Okay," Evelyn said, striking a match and lighting the fuel cell. "Now we wait for the air inside to warm up, then it'll lift on its own." Rosie stared at the flickering flame. "What if it falls in the lake?" "Then it gets wet," Evelyn said with a smile. "But that's the fun, part letting go and seeing where it goes." Jack crossed his arms, watching from a short distance. Evelyn didn't talk down to Rosie. She didn't hover or correct or force. She just showed up, fully present, laughing when the first lantern bobbed sideways and clapping when the second floated clean and straight into the sky. They launched 3 more, each carrying a whispered wish from Rosie's lip-small hopes about art camp, cupcakes, and a new backpack that didn't squeak when she walked. Evelyn glanced up at Jack as the last lantern lifted, her eyes catching his in the soft glow. "She's incredible," she said. Jack nodded, voice low. "Yeah, she really is." But his gaze lingered on Evelyn longer than it should have, because in that moment he wasn't just watching a woman connect with his daughter. He was watching someone let go of their wall-sewn glowing lantern at a time. The night wound down slowly, like the last notes of a song no one wanted to end. Most of the guests had already trickled out, their black sedans and chauffeured SUVs leaving quiet tire marks in the gravel. The tents were dimming, staff beginning to clear plates and fold up chairs, but the field still hummed with that lingering softness, the kind that lives only in memories and moments you didn't expect to matter as much as they did. Jack stood by the car, his hand resting on the roof, as he watched Rosie hug Evelyn tightly, like they were old friends parting after a week at camp. Evelyn crouched to meet her, brushing a stray curl behind Rosie's ear. "Thank you for the lanterns," Rosie whispered. "And for the strawberries. And for being nice." Evelyn smiled, a little unsteady. "Thank you for making tonight better." Rosie climbed into the back seat, yawning wide as the door shut behind her. The quiet that followed was deeper. Jack moved to the driver's side, keys in hand, but paused before opening the door. Evelyn stood a few feet away, arms folded loosely, looking like she wanted to say something but hadn't found the words. "So," Jack said, offering a faint smile, "back to your foundation meetings and boardrooms?" "And you, back to radiators and oil changes?" she replied, matching his tone. He nodded. "Probably a busted alternator tomorrow, or a squirrel nest in a fan belt. You never know." They both laughed, but the space between them didn't shrink. It just hovered. Familiar, yet not quite close. "This was good," she said finally. "I'm glad you came." Jack met her eyes. "Me too." He opened the door, then paused. "Do you do this a lot? Invite people to my events?" she asked. "No," he said more gently. "Connect like this." Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "No, not really." He nodded once, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Well, good night, Evelyn. Good night, Jack." He slid into the car, turned the key, and drove off slowly into the quiet road ahead. She stood in the rearview mirror for a while, smaller with every passing second. And even though nothing had been promised, even though nothing was said outright, both of them felt it something unfinished, something left unsaid. Goodbyes were supposed to be simple. This one wasn't. A week passed, slipping by in the usual blur of work and routine sweaty days at the garage, late dinners of boxed mac and cheese, and Rosie's non-stop chatter about glitter glue, sidewalk chalk, and the latest mystery novel she was reading for the third time. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm, steady and familiar, but under the surface, Jack couldn't quite shake the echo of Oak Ridge, the glow of lanterns, the softness in Evelyn's eyes, the way she'd lingered, like maybe she didn't want them to leave either. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, something unexpected arrived in the mail. Rosie was the one who found the envelope, tucked among the usual stack of bills and takeout menus. It was cream-colored, thick and smooth, with her name handwritten on the front in looping black ink. No return address. No logo. She tore it open with careful excitement and gasped, "Dad, it's a letter about art camp." Jack looked up from the kitchen sink, drying his hands on a towel. "Art camp?" Rosie nodded, wide-eyed, holding out a glossy pamphlet and a single sheet of heavy paper. "The one I told you about with the big studios and the mural wall and the clay wheels and everything?" Jack took the letter, frowning slightly as he read, "Dear Rosie, we're thrilled to inform you that you've been awarded a full scholarship to the Fairgrove Summer Arts Program. This includes all tuition, supplies, and transportation. We look forward to seeing your creativity shine. Sincerely, the scholarship committee." Jack stared at the words, his thumb grazing the bottom of the page, searching for a clue. No logo, no contact name. Just a generic committee. But he knew. Deep down, he knew. Rosie danced around the living room, hugging the pamphlet to her chest. "Dad, can you believe it? I didn't even apply. Do you think someone saw my drawings? Maybe at camp?" Jack smiled, heart full and aching at the same time. "Yeah, kiddo, maybe someone did." He said nothing more, but that night, as Rosie taped her acceptance letter to the fridge, Jack sat at the table with a quiet gratitude he couldn't quite put into words, and in the back of his mind he could still see her, Evelyn, standing in a field of fireflies, saying, "I just wanted it to feel like something you and Rosie could enjoy." Apparently she wasn't finished yet. Jack lay awake longer than usual that night, the ceiling fan casting slow, sweeping shadows across the room. Rosie had fallen asleep, fast tired from a full day at summer camp, and too excited about art camp to notice the world around her fading. But Jack's mind wouldn't settle. The letter sat on the kitchen table downstairs, still perfectly folded, like it hadn't just turned their lives sideways in the best possible way. A full scholarship. No forms, no waiting lists, no strings, Just, here. Take this. Enjoy. And no name. But Jack didn't need one. It was her. Evelyn Hart. He rolled onto his side, staring into the dark. A woman like that, money, influence, the kind of poise you only see in magazines or boardrooms. What was she doing showing up in parking lots and launching paper lanterns with little girls who eat peanut butter sandwiches on thrifted blankets? What made her choose them? She wasn't doing it for publicity. That much he was sure of. No photographers. No announcements. She'd slipped into his and Rosie's life like a whisper-no red carpet, no grand entrance. Just quiet moments. Fireworks. Laughter. A smile that didn't always reach her eyes. He thought back to their conversation by the lake, the way she'd said she always felt one step behind. How she'd looked at Rosie like she was remembering something lost, not just admiring something present. Jack knew about walls. He'd built enough of his own after loss, after struggle, after being left to raise a child with nothing but a busted truck and good intentions. But Evelyn's walls were different, softer, maybe, more polished. But walls just the same. He got up, padded into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. In the quiet hum of the fridge and the creak of floorboards, he tried to make sense of the question that had been sitting at the edge of his thoughts for days. Who is she when no one's watching? Not the CEO. Not the foundation director. Just Evelyn. The woman who watched fireworks from a parking lot, barefoot in red heels, smiling like it was the first time she'd exhaled in weeks. And for reasons he couldn't quite name, he wanted to know the answer. The photos surfaced 3 days later. Not on gossip blogs or tabloids. Evelyn had outgrown those distractions years ago, but tucked quietly into a regional business column, the kind investors and board members actually read. A puff piece about the Hart Foundation's commitment to community engagement, paired with a few candid snapshots from the Oak Ridge event. There she was, smiling in the glow of paper lanterns, and beside her, unmistakable even in the low light, Jack, in his scuffed boots and wrinkled shirt, holding Rosie's hand. The article didn't say anything scandalous. It didn't have to. The images spoke volumes. By noon, Evelyn's inbox was flooded. Is that your date? Is this someone we should vet? Looks charmingly humble. But is he appropriate for our image? And beneath it all, the unspoken question pulsed. What are you doing with someone like him? She sat at her desk in the glass-walled corner office, phone face down, jaw clenched. The board hadn't scheduled a formal meeting, but the shift in tone was clear. They didn't say, "Don't see him." They didn't have to. They just reminded her, in the most polished terms possible, what she was supposed to be: strategic, aspirational, cleanly branded. And Jack Bennett didn't fit that mold. He wasn't the right dinner party plus one. He wasn't a donor. He wasn't media safe. He was kind. He was steady. He saw through her and somehow made her feel like being seen wasn't a threat, which made him dangerous. So Evelyn did what she'd learned to do. She pulled back. No texts. No calls. No follow-up after Rosie's scholarship letter. She told herself it was temporary, just until things quieted down, just until the foundation's next quarterly push passed. But even as she stared at her planner, full of meetings and polished obligations, her eyes kept drifting to the empty space in the corner of her phone screen, where a new message should have been. The silence stretched longer than she expected. And though she was the one who created it, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was the one being left behind. Jack stared at his phone for the third time that afternoon, thumb hovering over the screen like maybe, this time, it would light up with her name. But it didn't. Just the same silent screen, the same unanswered message from 2 days ago. He'd kept it simple. Hey, just checking in. Hope you're good. Nothing too much, nothing too vulnerable. Just enough to leave the door open. It stayed unread. The last time they spoke, Evelyn had promised to show Rosie the Foundation's art studio invite that came with genuine excitement in her voice, not the polished charm she used at events. Rosie had circled the date on the fridge calendar in bright red marker. But the day came and went with no word. Jack had called once straight to voicemail. He'd waited a few hours. Called again. Same result. Now, days later, Rosie had stopped asking when Evelyn was coming. She just moved the red circle to the following Saturday and said, "Maybe she's really busy." Jack didn't have the heart to erase it. At the garage, he was short on patience. A stripped bolt sent him into a muttered string of curses, and his boss raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Jack wasn't usually the type to lose his temper over a piece of metal. He wasn't the type to get caught up either, but here he was checking his phone between oil changes, half expecting something that wasn't coming. He tried to convince himself it didn't matter. Maybe it was all in his head. A few kind conversations, a shared night, and a little wishful thinking. Evelyn Hart probably lived her life in calendar blocks and closed-door meetings. Maybe he'd imagined what he thought he saw the way she looked at him when the lanterns lifted into the sky, like something in her was opening up for the first time. Maybe he was just a temporary escape, a detour. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and shoved the phone back in his pocket. He felt foolish. Not for hoping, but for believing, even for a moment, that someone like her would make space in a world like his. Evelyn stood at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, surrounded by sleek laptops, pristine portfolios, and the silent hum of judgment. The Hart Foundation's quarterly board meeting was halfway over, and she hadn't heard a single word about the scholarship initiative or the youth art expansion, just metrics, press impressions, and brand alignment. The final straw came when one of the senior members, a well-meaning but entirely oblivious man in designer cufflinks, leaned forward with a measured smile. "I just advise caution, Evelyn. These personal appearances of yours, particularly that recent photo with the mechanic and his daughter, might dilute the narrative we've spent years cultivating." She looked at him, really looked, then slowly closed the leather folder in front of her. "Dilute the narrative," she repeated, her voice low but clear. There was a flicker of unease around the table. "I understand we have an image to uphold," she said. "But if that image requires me to pretend I'm someone I'm not, then we're telling the wrong story." Another board member spoke up gently. "Evelyn, no one's questioning your leadership." "I am," she interrupted, straightening. "I am questioning it." A hush settled over the room. She set both palms on the table. "I've spent years making sure this foundation looks perfect from the outside. Glossy events, carefully curated messaging, everything filtered, everything polished. But what's the point if the people we say we're helping never actually feel like they belong in our spaces?" Someone cleared their throat. Another tapped nervously on their tablet. "I met a man who lives in a world we pretend to care about," she continued. "He fixes cars. He raises a daughter on single paychecks and scraped-together mornings. And he didn't ask me for anything, not attention, not money, just a real conversation. And I've been hiding from it because I was scared you'd all think he wasn't enough." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't blink. "Well, I've decided he is. More than enough." No one spoke. Evelyn took a slow breath. If the Hart Foundation can't make room for real connection, real lives, then I'm not sure I'm the right person to be leading it. Then she gathered her folder, nodded once, and walked out, heels silent, head high, and heart finally beating for something that felt real. The first comment came from the cashier at Benson's Market, as Jack was sliding a carton of milk and a box of cereal onto the conveyor. "So, you're famous now, huh?" she said, raising an eyebrow with a smirk. Jack blinked. "What?" She held up her phone, screen tilted just enough for him to see a blurry photo from the Oak Ridge Eventham, Evelyn, and Rosie, standing in the soft glow of paper lanterns. The headline below read, "Fireworks, Foundations, and a Small-Town Mystery Man." Jack didn't respond. He just paid for his groceries and walked out, but the words stuck to him like oil on skin. By the time he got back to the garage, it was worse. Marty, the tow truck driver, whistled low as Jack passed. "Hey, bossman, should we start calling you Mr. Hart now?" A few customers lingered near the bay longer than usual, eyes drifting to Jack, pretending not to stare. Someone snickered when he walked into the break room. Even his boss, Tom, gave him a long look over the top of his coffee. "You need to get ahead of this," Tom muttered, "before folks start thinking you're cashing in." "I'm not cashing anything," Jack said, jaw tight. "I went to an event. That's it." Tom gave a slow nod, like he didn't quite believe him but didn't want to push it. The worst came at pickup, when Rosie came bounding out of the rec center with her usual energy, until a group of older kids snickered behind their hands and one called out, "Hey, Rosie, is your dad gonna marry that rich lady now?" She froze. Jack's stomach sank. He stepped forward fast, hand on her shoulder, and guided her to the car without a word. That night, she was quiet. Her drawings stayed in her backpack. She didn't mention Evelyn once. Jack sat on the porch after she went to bed, the town's familiar skyline stretching dark and unchanged in front of him. And yet everything felt different. He'd spent years keeping his head down, working hard, staying invisible. Now, one photo, one connection had put a spotlight on him he never asked for, and the heat of it was starting to burn. By Monday morning, there was a voicemail waiting for Jack from a number he didn't recognize, one of those clipped, too friendly voices, asking if he'd be willing to share his story for a quick interview. Just a human interest piece, they said. Just a glimpse into the real man behind the mystery. There was even talk of compensation. He deleted it without replying. By Tuesday, a young reporter from a regional lifestyle blog actually showed up at the garage, bright smile, voice sugary, camera in tow. Jack met her outside the bay doors, wiping his hands on a rag, his tone polite but flat. "Not interested." "But it could be great exposure for your shop," she insisted. "You and Evelyn Hart, that's a story people want." Jack's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice even. "You want a quote? Here it is. I fix cars. That's it." He went back inside without another word, and the reporter left, her smile faltering as she slid behind the wheel of her car. Rosie heard about it later, from a kid at camp who said their mom saw Jack on some blog. She didn't bring it up right away, but Jack noticed the way she poked at her food at dinner, quiet and thoughtful. "Dad?" she asked finally, pushing a pea across her plate. "Why didn't you tell them your side?" "So people don't say the wrong stuff." Jack leaned back in his chair and considered the question. "Because sometimes," he said, "you don't have to shout to be heard. You just live the truth loud enough that people notice on their own." Rosie squinted at him. "So, like, actions speak louder?" "Exactly." She nodded slowly, then offered, "You could have told them about the lanterns. That was nice." He smiled. "Yeah, but that moment was ours. Doesn't need to be anyone else's." That night, Jack sat on the porch again, watching the stars rise above the rooftops. He could have made a quick buck, turned gossip into gain. But instead, he chose silence. Dignity. Because some things didn't need explaining. And Evelyn, if she ever came back, would know that he hadn't tried to sell the only real thing they'd shared. The day had started like any other heat, rising off the Rodione. Pavement, the scent of oil thick in the air, and Jack elbow-deep in the guts of an old Corolla that refused to idle without sounding like a dying lawnmower. Sweat lined his brow, and the world outside the bay doors was nothing but sun glare and traffic. Just another Tuesday, until the silver SUV rolled into the lot. He didn't notice it at first, too focused on the timing belt, but the quiet hush that fell across the garage was unmistakable. The hum of conversation stopped, tools stilled, and when Jack finally glanced up, she was there, Evelyn. Hair pulled back in a neat twist, sunglasses perched on her head, wearing jeans and a navy blouse that probably cost more than his rent. But it wasn't the outfit that hit him. It was the expression, not polished. Not poised, just unsure. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from under the hood, keeping his voice steady. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I know," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't call because I wasn't sure you'd want me to." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For pulling away, for disappearing, for not explaining." Jack crossed his arms, waiting not cold, but cautious. "You don't owe me anything." "I think I do," she said. "You were real with me. I wasn't real back." He let that settle, eyes scanning her face, looking for the distance he'd seen before. It was still there, but dimmed, replaced by something closer to vulnerability. "There was pressure," she continued. "From my board, from the media, from myself, honestly. I panicked. It's stupid, but I didn't know how to be in something I couldn't control." Jack gave a small nod. "Yeah, it's not easy letting someone in." She stepped closer. "But I miss Rosie. I miss this. You." That word lingered in the air, fragile and brave. Jack looked at her, long and slow, then finally said, "You want to come in and ruin your shoes with some motor oil?" She laughed, relieved and maybe a little teary. "Depends. You still have those awful vending machine coffees?" He held the garage door open. "Worst in 3 counties. And just like that, the space between them began to close, not rebuilt, not rushed, just no longer burning, just smoldering. With a chance. The garage was quieter than usual that afternoon. The hum of machines had faded to a low murmur, and most of the crew had cleared out early, the summer heat pushing them toward cold drinks and air conditioning. But Jack stayed, like he always did, cleaning tools, wiping down the workbench, pretending not to notice Evelyn standing in the corner of the bay, watching him like she wasn't sure if she was welcome yet. She'd stayed after their awkward coffee-bad vending machine brew, and Alan lingered longer than either of them expected. Now, the light through the bay doors had turned golden, casting long shadows, softening everything, except the silence between them. Jack finally set the wrench down with a clink and turned to face her. "All right," he said. "You came back. That's something." Evelyn met his eyes, not flinching this time. "I meant what I said earlier. I miss this. You, Rosie." Jack nodded once, slowly. "Okay, but here's the thing. I don't want to be someone's good deed." Evelyn blinked. "You're not." "I need to say it," he said firmly. "Because if you're here out of guilt, or to fix something you think you broke, that's not enough. I've spent too much of my life trying to matter to people who didn't know what to do with me. I'm not looking for a project, or a story that makes someone else feel better about themselves." She stepped forward, closer now, her voice quieter. "I'm not here out of guilt, Jack. I'm here because, when I was with you, I didn't feel like I had to be anyone else. I didn't have to sell anything, or prove anything. It was just me." Jack studied her, the weight of her words settling into his chest like truth. "I don't want charity," he said. "And I sure as hell don't need pity. But if you're going to stand in this garage with me, really stand here then, I need honesty, all of it. No more disappearing." Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "Then, let's start from here. No vanishing, no performances, just us." Jack took a breath, deep and steady, and nodded. "Then we've got a shot." And in the fading light, it wasn't fireworks that lit the space, it was something quieter, deeper, the kind of spark nobody sees. But once it's there, it doesn't go out. 2 weeks later, Jack found himself standing in a place he never expected to be, inside the gleaming glass conference room of the Hart Foundation's downtown office. It smelled like lemon polish and quiet money. Rosie stood beside him, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack, while Evelyn adjusted a whiteboard filled with color-coded sticky notes and tiny sketches of fireworks in every shape imaginable. "This is not the garage," Jack muttered under his breath. Rosie giggled. "It's like a spaceship in here." Evelyn turned from the board, her smile soft but sure. "Welcome to the planning committee." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this?" "As a firework malfunction on New Year's Eve," she replied with a wink. "You two have better instincts than half the people who get paid to do this. Besides, you've seen the show from the best seats in town. Your perspective matters." He glanced around the room again. "I don't even know what designing fireworks means." "You don't have to," Evelyn said. "You just have to tell me what people actually care about, What makes them stop and feel something? That's what this show should do. Rosie stepped forward, eyes already lighting up as she peered at the board. Can we do one that makes a heart and then explodes into stars? Like, boom, but in a nice way? Evelyn smiled at her. Absolutely. You're now head of the emotional impact department. Jack watched them, a strange feeling growing in his chest, part disbelief, part pride. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a spotlight. This was inclusion. A seat at the table. An invitation to create. And maybe more importantly, it was a chance to do something with Evelyn. Not next to her. Not in her shadow. With her. So, Evelyn said, holding up a marker, should we start with color palettes or music cues? Jack folded his arms, smirking. I vote sandwiches first. Creative people need fuel. Evelyn laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't sound rehearsed. Deal. And as Rosie pulled out her sketch pad, and Evelyn started jotting down notes, Jack leaned back in his chair and let the moment settle. This wasn't a detour anymore. This was beginning to feel like a place they belonged. By the end of the second planning session, Jack was officially in deeper than he'd ever planned. He stood at the edge of the long table in the Hart Foundation's creative wing, watching Rosie buzz around with colored markers in one hand and a clipboard in the other, as if she'd been born to run fireworks logistics. Evelyn was laughing, really laughing as Rosie explained why the finale needed at least 2 sparkle spirals and 1 sky-filling heart. It was infectious, that energy, real. And Jack couldn't deny how good it felt to see his daughter shining like that, not just participating but belonging. Still, a part of him stood back, cautious. He'd lived too long with strings wrapped around good intentions. After the others left the room, Evelyn lingered by the table, organizing papers that didn't really need organizing. Jack walked over slowly, hands in his pockets. You've got her thinking she's co-director now, he said, a trace of a smile on his lips. She kind of is, Evelyn replied. And between you and me, she's got better instincts than most of the consultants I've paid. Jack chuckled, then let the silence settle for a moment. I need to say something, he said finally. Evelyn looked up, meeting his eyes. Okay, I'm in. I mean, if you're serious about us helping with this, with you, then yeah, I'm in. He shifted slightly, voice steady but firm. But it has to be real. Not a favor. Not some feel-good project that ends when the show does. Evelyn nodded slowly. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't real. No strings, he added. No games. If Rosie and I are walking into your world, I need to know it's not just a nice story you'll use at a donor dinner. Evelyn's expression softened. You're not a story, Jack. Neither of you are. He studied her for a long beat, then nodded. All right, then we're partners. She held out her hand, no fanfare, no hesitation. Partners. He shook it, firm and sure. Across the room, Rosie looked up from her sketch pad and gave them both a big grin. Does this mean we can start working on the launch music now? Jack glanced at Evelyn, then back at Rosie. Yeah, kid. I think it does. The parking lot behind Donnelly's diner wasn't much. Just a flat stretch of cracked pavement, lit by 2 flickering overhead lights, and the glow of a neon sign buzzing faintly against the night. But the view of the stars was clear, unbothered by city lights or noise. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing. Unless they were looking for quiet. Jack had brought Rosie here more times than he could count. After long days, after hard ones, when she missed her mom, when he just needed the world to slow down. Tonight, Evelyn came too. No fireworks, no crowd, no foundation banners, or carefully scheduled appearances. Just her, Jack, Rosie, a thermos of cocoa, and a bag of fast food fries balanced between them on the hood of Jack's truck. Rosie lay on the blanket near the front bumper, drawing constellations with her finger in the air. That one's definitely a dragon, she said, pointing to a cluster of stars. Jack leaned against the truck beside Evelyn, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. Pretty sure that's Orion's belt. Well, Rosie said matter-of-factly, it's a dragon wearing a belt. Evelyn laughed softly, her her breath visible in the cool evening air. She looked up at the sky, then around at the empty lot, the faded lines, the broken bottle by the curb, the silence. "This is nice," she said, quietly. Jack nodded. "Yeah, it is." She looked over at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't sat still like this in, I don't know, years." "You forget how good it feels when you're always moving," he replied. Evelyn stared up again, her eyes tracing the stars. "All the money, the parties, the